The restaurant industry was one of the areas hardest hit by the pandemic. How is the industry recovering? We are now joined by Michelle Korsmo, President and CEO of the National Restaurant Association. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing well. So let's start out with that. Everyone knows that it was very difficult on the restaurant industry. I think everyone knows somebody who probably lost a restaurant job at one point or the other. But now, and I was traveling like so many people were over the Memorial Day weekend, and the restaurants are bustling. What's going on?
Well, it's exactly that. Restaurants are bustling. And when you were talking about the restaurant people that have lost jobs, it's also the people that may have lost one of their favorite neighborhood restaurants that didn't make it through the pandemic. That makes all of us a little bit sad because we miss those parts of our communities. But right now, restaurants are coming back and people feel great. In fact, 4 out of 5 restaurant operators expect to be fully backed by the end of this year. And that's a great thing. 74% of them are reporting higher sales than last year, which is exactly what we want to see. And restaurants are on track to contribute $1 trillion to the economy. So just a really terrific position for the restaurant industry to be poised for growth at a time when they really want it.
And what patterns have you seen, Michelle, regarding, during the worst parts of the pandemic, people were getting takeout. They couldn't even go into restaurants, a lot of restaurants anyway. What are the patterns now? Because obviously some people still have major health considerations. I know people still getting COVID. Are you seeing kind of any patterns of takeout and eat-in that our audience would like to know?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what we call off-premise food. So people that are taking restaurant food away from the dining room. And that number continues to be very high. In fact, 2/3 of all restaurant meals are consumed outside of a restaurant dining room. Now, that includes all of the drive-through business that you'll notice from any quick service restaurant. But more than that, we're finding that consumers have actually changed the way they eat since we kind of changed the way we had to eat at restaurants during the pandemic. And I like to think of it as restaurant meals beyond just the dining room or the drive-through. They're thinking about taking out restaurant meals and serving at home as a restaurant or as a meal for their family. We're seeing a lot of people that are thinking more about, are they picking up? Are they delivering? Different ways that they can access that restaurant food. And the other thing we're finding is that because we still are in a different work environment where we're not 100% back in the office the way we used to, or downtown areas or neighborhoods have shifted a bit, we're also seeing that what we would consider traditional meal patterns have changed, and people aren't getting breakfast food just at breakfast time or lunch just in that kind of lunch hour, but they're actually looking for meals at various times of the day. We see a nice pickup in the middle of the day for snacks, a nice late night business. So restaurant food is different than the traditional expectation.
And that leads to an audience question. This for you, Michelle. This is from Christiane Riki, chef/owner of the restaurant Riki. And what does the future look like for restaurants serving the in-city business community? Will workers be returning to their urban offices? I know you just mentioned that, our office, more and more people are coming in, but, no one's here 5 days a week. I imagine there's a little bit of a difference between, there's a lot of foot traffic in cities as opposed to rural areas.
There is, and we're seeing that difference in what's happening for restaurants. So if you're in an urban area like Iriki is in a beautiful downtown Washington, D.C., that pattern has changed where they may not have as many late nights. It may be very much in the middle of the week because that's a busier time for people in the office. But the other thing that's happening is a lot of downtowns are changing the way they're offering environments. Just down the street from Iriki, there's an office building that's being converted into a residential building to come online in another year. And so with more residential space taking up some of the space that traditional commercial real estate has taken, I think you're going to find that restaurants will find new and different meal patterns and different customers. But it will take time. And for those restaurants that are in urban areas, they are having a much different time kind of coming back to what they would consider full service restaurant status. And it's tough. And so people should think about that as well when they're thinking about their favorite restaurants, because they are, again, more dependent upon that takeout and delivery meal that you just talked about.
Speaking of tough things and challenges, as we were coming out and getting toward the end of the pandemic, now that we can look at it in the rearview mirror, inflation has soared. What has been the impact of inflation passing along some of the cost to consumers, because the restaurant can't take it all after, barely surviving, at least some of them, many of them, during the pandemic?
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing that's happening when you look at restaurants. It's hard to tell on the outside what's actually happening from the financial health of that restaurant, because there were almost 200,000 restaurants that didn't receive funding through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund because that funding dried up and was not renewed. And so there's restaurants out there that may not have the same balance sheet as their neighbors, trying to figure out how to compete. And then as they were faced in the last year with increased food costs, as well as increased labor costs, they really thought about how are they passing on those increases and not hurting employees, or I'm sorry, not hurting restaurant customers coming into their location or ordering their food. And what operators have told me is that it really is that question of value. So there are definitely most restaurants in a space where they have taken price increases, but they're always sensitive to how their customer is responding. And what they've found is if they really think about the value of the food and the meal that they're providing, and does that value match the price point, they keep those customers coming back in a way that they're happy with the restaurant meal and with the price that they're paying. And so there is definitely a space where restaurant operators know they can't keep taking price increases because they'll wind up losing customers, but they have to figure out how they're going to make up the expense of those increased prices. One thing I think people should be aware of is for the average independent restaurant, their margins are about 3 to 5%. So if you're looking at inflation that's well above that 5% number, if they're not increasing the prices that are on their menu, they're actually losing money just by operating and trying to cover all of their expenses. So there is that pain point where you need to increase some of the menu prices, but I'm proud to say through our numbers and the work of restaurant operators that we're getting some of that price stabilization back in line. And so people are seeing much more consistency in food prices and therefore much more consistency in menu pricing.
Speaking of getting things back, what about getting people back? A lot of people had to get other jobs during the pandemic, had to leave their restaurant jobs. Has it been challenging to get them back, or new people to replace people who had been very experienced?
Oh, very much so. When people think about restaurants, they always think about the people working in the restaurants. Between the food and the service, that really is the restaurant experience. The restaurant industry employs 15 million people across the country. We're the second largest employer by sector. We're 10% of the nation's workforce. So the restaurant workforce is significant. And what we're hearing from restaurant operators is 2/3 of them say that right now they're understaffed. And they're in a space where we're up against 2 openings for every candidate in the US for positions right now. So restaurants are very much feeling the need of trying to make sure that they're creating attractive work environments for their team and making sure that they have what they need to serve their customers. So without a doubt, the restaurant industry is always thinking about how we can bring more people into the industry and make this an attractive place for people to work.
What about the role of AI? It's what I'm asking everybody today. I asked lawmakers about it. What about AI in the future of the restaurant industry?
I think AI in the restaurant industry is actually really fun. There's been some great conversations about AI. We just came off of the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago, where tens of thousands of people gathered and all of the latest technology was in place. And the hot topic of conversation, of course, was technology and AI. some really interesting places where companies are using AI, mostly in test case at this point, is through the drive-through. So if you're thinking about quick service restaurants and going through the drive-through and you're interacting with an individual, restaurants are looking at bringing AI and large language models into that chatbot. And there's a great story about this of what Wendy's is doing at a test restaurant in Ohio, where they have a chatbot that is fully AI that will take your order as a drive-through customer and start processing, send that information into the kitchen, and then start processing that order. And what's interesting about AI in the restaurant industry is the various ways that people order food. So if you think about Wendy's or any other quick service restaurant, there's probably lots of different names that people give, different than the corporate official brand name of a potential hamburger or sandwich that they offer. Some of their beverages, you hear biggie bags or different ways that they would upsell fries. And so those large language models have to be able to process the different ways that people will order in a way that they understand how to put that order through that has as much accuracy as possible. So when restaurants are thinking about where AI can come into place, keep using this example of the drive-through, it really is about how do we do this to improve the customer experience. And in a drive-through environment, that customer experience is all about speed, consistency, and accuracy. So that accuracy of the order is really critical, and that's where we're excited to see what AI brings into the space. We're also seeing a lot of people use AI as they look at hiring. You know, we just talked about how it's so important for us to get workers into the restaurant industry. We'll actually need 500,000 more workers in the industry by the end of this year. And what we know is the speed of response to those applications is really critical. And AI can help get a real-time response and almost screening process for potential applicants through the services that restaurants are offering. And it's often, you know, in a text format where you can be texting with AI that talks a little bit about your experience, talks about availability, and can go as far as setting up the interview or even discussing what a schedule might look like.
Today, as you know, there's a big debt limit bill headed to the House floor. It's likely going to pass, and then it heads to the Senate where there will be some drama, but it looks like it will pass. So that will avoid, potentially, if that happens, a global meltdown. But other than that issue, which everyone's got to be tracking, what issues, whether that's legislation or regulation, are you tracking out of Washington?
Well, other than the debt ceiling, which definitely we are among the group that wants to make sure that that is taken care of, the big things that we're concerned about go back into the question of workers. And we're really pleased with legislation that was introduced by Representatives Smucker and Cuellar for the essential workers for economic advancement. And this would allow a 3-year visa for non-immigrant workers. So not a citizenship question, not kind of dealing with some of the larger immigration issues, but really providing that visa for people that want to work in the U.S. In a documented and legal way. This program has a capacity of 65,000 workers. So when we think about the work that's needed in the industry, it's really a drop in the bucket, but a wonderful start for having a space for non-skilled workers to come in. We're also very concerned about what's happening in the credit card fee space. You know, credit card swipe fees for restaurants are the 3rd highest expense in a restaurant, behind food costs and labor costs. And what we're advocating for is to find more competition in the marketplace. We would like to see for any of the networks that there are unaffiliated networks that are required to join or allowed to join into a transaction so that consumers or the businesses actually have a choice in providers. And that choice in providers allows for more competition, which would create some more pricing pressure to try to keep some of those fees down.
That swipe fee fight is quite intense. It's been going on for quite some time and probably be going on for quite some time. Michelle Korsmo, President and CEO of the National Restaurant Association, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob.